So we're on page 75 in your journal. We're going to be talking about properties. These are going to be all properties of addition and multiplication. Okay, notice we're not going to mention division or a little bit of subtraction here, but it's just a very minor part of the distributive property. So commutative property, okay, so your commutative property, the only thing that you need to know, not the only thing, but the hint that I'm going to give you to remember the commutative property is it starts with a C, okay? So you can change the order of the add-ins. So you just change the order. Change the order of your terms in your multiplication problem. So 2 times 4 becomes 4 times 2. So you can change the order and still get the same product, okay? It does not change the answer if you switch the order. So that's called the commutative property. We've talked quite a bit about that this year. The associative property, okay, starts with an A, right? So your little hint to remember is it's all, starts with an A as well, all the same signs, okay? So if it's an addition, associative property of addition, it's all addition signs, okay? So it's all the same signs. If it's associative property of multiplication, it's all the same signs. But associative has to have grouping of some sort, or it's not the associative property. So this grouping that we're talking about is parentheses, okay? So it doesn't matter how you associate the numbers, okay? So we have 3 plus 4 plus 5 equals 3 plus 4 plus 5, but 3 and 4 are associated into parentheses here, and 4 or 5 on this side of the equal sign are associated into parentheses. So if you're not sure if it's associative property, ask yourself, is it all the same signs? Does it have the parentheses that are grouping them in different ways on each side of the equal sign? So because they're all different signs, it does not change the sum or the product. Okay? Distributive property, okay, so write this into your notes, it's not in there. What they did was that 6 times 54, they broke 54 apart into 50 plus 4. So they're saying that 6, okay, they broke 54 into 50 plus 4. So they're breaking apart, they're saying, they're distributing the 6, okay? 6 is squished up to these parentheses, so it's being multiplied by everything inside the parentheses. So 6 times 50 is 6 times 50 plus 6 times 4. So if I multiply 6 by 50 and 6 by 4 and then add those up, I'm going to get the same answer as if I said 6 times 54. That's the distributive property. Another way, all right, and so underlining what's important in the distributive property, you're going to be multiplying, okay, this number outside here of these parentheses wants to be distributed, multiplied by everything inside the parentheses. So it's going to be multiplied, okay, by, so they're saying they're by a sum or a difference. So you're either adding or subtracting inside the parentheses, adding or subtracting inside the parentheses. So you can say 6 times 2 plus 6 times 4, and that's what's said right here. Or you have 8 times 5 minus 8 times 3. So the identity property of addition and multiplication, okay, the identity property of addition, a way that a number, when adding something to it, does not lose its identity, is when you add 0, see, it doesn't lose its identity. So the identity property is when you add 0 to it. The identity property of multiplication, well, when you multiply by 1, 7 times 1 is still 7. It doesn't lose its identity. So those are the identity properties of addition and multiplication. Then you have the inverse property of addition. The inverse property of addition means that if you add opposites, okay, if the sum of a number and its opposite, so if you add opposites, negative 3 plus 3, or negative 10 plus 10, your answer is always 0. So that's the inverse property. So go to page 77. So we're going to do some examples of the distributive property. So we have 5 times 2 plus 4. So we're going to write this out a little bit differently. I know that you can say 2 plus 4 is 6 and then multiply by 5. But I want you to show me an example of the distributive property. Okay, we're not really trying to solve this. We're trying to show the distributive property. So this 5 is waiting outside these parentheses. It's like knocking on the door. It's wanting to be multiplied by everything inside. So write these little lines as you're working on your homework. So 5 times 2 is 5 times 2. Now might it be written as 10? Sure. It could be. 5 times 4 is 5 times 4. So that's an example of the distributive property. Associative, you can do the associative property of addition or the associative property of multiplication. Okay, I'm just going to do addition. So associative, I could say 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 2 plus 3 plus 4. But remember, the associative also has to have parentheses. Has to. So I'm going to associate the 2 and the 3 over here on this side of the equal sign. And on this side, I'm going to associate the 3 and the 4. So these have to be equal to each other because you're all the same signs. Same can be done with multiplication on the associative property. Commutative, same thing. We can have multiplication or we can have addition. So I'm going to do the multiplication this time. So let's say 5 times 7 equals 7 times 5. That's the commutative property. You just change the order. Inverse means that you are adding opposites, and you're always going to get 0. So negative 20 plus 20 equals 0. Okay, the identity property, there's two identity properties. You have the identity property of addition and the identity property of multiplication. So anything, let's say 20, plus 0 is still 20. And on multiplication, let's say 15 times 1 is still 15. Okay, so those are the examples of your properties. So on this one right here, we're going to evaluate each expression. This expression on this side of the equal sign and this expression on this side of the equal sign. And we're going to see, is it equivalent? And if it is, what property was being used? So this 6 to me is knocking on this door, wanting to be multiplied by everything inside. Okay? So I don't know what x is, but I can write 6 times x, just like this by squishing them together. Okay? 6 times x plus 6 times 2, they just wrote it in a different way. They wrote it as 12. So yes, these are equivalent, and that 6 was distributed. So this is the distributive property. Okay? So on this, we have 3x plus 1 and multiplied by 1. I'm sorry, 3x plus 2 and then multiplied by 1. So here I notice that we have 3x plus 2, 3x plus 2. And this was multiplied by 1, and it did not change. This is 3x plus 2. This is 3x plus 2. So, yes, they are equivalent, and this is the identity property. Now, could it be distributive property? Could this have been distributed and then gotten the same thing because it was both multiplied by 1? Yes, it could also be distributive. So on this one, you see 4x minus 2, and on this side of the equal sign, you see 4x plus 2. So, because these are very different, okay, I'm subtracting 2 on this side, I'm adding 2 on this side. This is not equivalent, so no property. So on this one, we have 9x, and then we have 3 and 7. And on this side, we have 9x and 3 and 7 in a different order, so no parentheses. So, since it's all addition, and we have the same numbers, okay, it's going to be equivalent, but it's going to be the commutative property. They just changed the order. It's not associative because they don't have the parentheses. Same thing with this one. All they did was flip it. So you have, yes, it is equivalent, and it's commutative again. All right, on this one we have 2x plus 6 plus 4, 2x plus 6 plus 4. So all the same signs, and they're associated differently. So yes, it's associative. So on this one, we have 8 knocking at the door. It wants to be distributed to both those numbers. So we have 8 times x, that's what's written here, minus 8 times 5, which is what is written here. So yes, it is equivalent, and it was the distributive property.